Hello and welcome to Earth Star Observatory. I'm lilywalker and I have missed you. Thank you for stopping by the channel today. Thank you for being here. I deeply and greatly appreciate you, as well as this place of opportunity for connection between friends, teachers, and other students on the path. You know, not all of my family and friends and people in my world who I love and admire the heck out of and am so grateful to be in community with are actually as fond of the topics that I come here to discuss with you guys on this channel. This is why I'm so grateful to be connected to you, like light upon light, worldwide, at the same time that I'm connected to them too. So, without further ado, I came here to share with you guys today some of the things that I've been reading and thinking about lately. And I think that you're going to like this topic. Synchronistically, it's very much on pulse with Saturn in Pisces. The topic of this video is creative imagination and how it may be understood to be the modus operandi for soul-saving action, or Theurgy, as well as how the astrological chart, when understood as a revealed text, is used in this process of salvation by way of the stars, or astrotheurgy, as taught in the Platonic schools, as well as by Ibn Arabi, or the great Sufi mystic and astrologer Avicenna. In short, the topic is creative imagination as it relates to Theurgy by way of the stars. Now, that's a topic that I've been interested in for a while now and have previously presented on from a different angle on this channel. But I recently encountered a set of writers and thinkers, a body of work that is turning out to be a literal leap pad between the practices of classical astrology in the Hellenistic era and the practice of these same revived methods now. This is my experience, at least. So I wanted to share some of these ideas with you to see what you think. Now, as many of you have probably already learned, there came a time in the history of Christianity and the lands and peoples governed by the Roman Empire, where, unlike West Coast Oregon, coexist was not the most popular bumper sticker. With the Council of Nicaea in 325, the founding of Constantinople in 330, the murder of Hypatia in 415, and the closing of the Neoplatonic Academy by the Emperor Justinian in 529, we can see a trajectory of intolerance towards heterodox thinking, anything other than Orthodox Christianity, pick up and grow to a crescendo. When that wave broke, we are told that many, if not most, of the professors, students, and people studying and practicing this material left their hometowns and migrated to Constantinople. And when they left, they brought their books and their relative level of understanding or living lineage with them. We are also told that when Constantinople fell in 1453, that modern students, as well as those living under the banner of the Holy Roman Empire from the years 529 to 1453, that's when we got our books back. This is when Cosimo de' Medici sent scouts to travel the route of Constantinople looking for teachings related to Hermeticism, Plato, astrology, and other mystical works. And it is also when Cosimo de' Medici commissions Ficino to translate the Corpus Hermeticum and famously says, "No, Plato can wait. Translate the Corpus Hermeticum first." Now, from where I was standing as a student when I heard Terence McKenna tell me this story, I agreed wholeheartedly. Plato could wait. I wanted the Corpus Hermeticum. But from where I'm currently standing in this river as a student, I wonder if it wouldn't have been cooler if we had gotten turned back on to Plato first. The problem is that here in the West, we are so left brain dominant. And although we are taught in various schools of esotericism in the teachings related to progression of the equinox and how it corresponds to the progression of soul consciousness, that this intrinsic inclination of the Western mind towards an Aristotelian way of thinking, one of rational doubt and skepticism, is intentional. It's for a reason. It's part of the grand master plan in order to help us cultivate the capacity to think objectively with the sort of mastery that we see resulting in the high points and marvels of modern science. It is also true, as Avicenna teaches, and Corbin writes in Creative Imagination and the Mystical Experience in the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, that the heart has two eyes, reason and imagination, and dominance of either distorts perception and awareness. As Corbin goes on to say, the rational path of philosophers and theologians needs to be complemented by the mystical intuition of the Sufis, the unveiling that allows for imaginal, not imaginary, vision. The heart, which itself is unitary consciousness, must become attuned to its own fluctuation. At one beat seeing God's incomparability with the eye of reason, and at the next seeing his similarity with the eye of imagination. Its two visions are prefigured in the two primary names of the scripture, Al-Quran, that which brings together, and Al-Furqan, that which differentiates. And from where I'm sitting as a student currently, well, let's just say, in order to avoid polemics, that I would greatly appreciate more information and teachings related to the right-brained way of seeing things, especially as it relates to my astrology practice, for the health of my heart and vitality and my light. And from what Avicenna is telling me, the place to look for this is Plato. From what I have read, doubt and skepticism related to the teachings of Plato made their way into the school and culture early. Those skeptical of Plato's work and more inclined towards the thinking of his student, Aristotle, eventually formed a middle and a new academy. Apparently, the beef of the new academy comes down to a question of doubt. The new academy thinkers began wondering how Plato had carried forward to lay out and describe the fundamental principles of ethics, physics, cosmology, and theurgy as an exposition of truth, when his teacher Socrates had stopped, full stop, at the notion that we know only one thing, and that is that we know nothing. And the answer to that question, of course, is by way of supersensible perception, or the imagination, this other window that Avicenna tells us is in the heart. But the wisdom of the heart is not something that can be found in books. For heart wisdom, we need a lineage. In order to light a wick, we need a living light, like light upon light, right? And during the time when Constantinople fell and we got our books back, it had been ages since a living lineage representing the teachings of the old academy had a significant number, by any calculation, of boots on the ground in the Western arena. The Platonic Academy had closed 1,000 years in the past, and we were jet-setting towards the Enlightenment and about to discover the new world and claim it for Jesus and the Spanish crown. It might have been cooler if we had decided to eat our dinner before we had cake, Cosimo, but I can't say that I would have done any differently, or that it would have made any difference. In the Ottoman Empire, however, we have a bit of a different story. It was the Ottoman Turks that eventually captured Constantinople, and from whom we got our books back. So we know that all along they had the material. But the Persian astrologers were mixing with the Greek world all along. They were part of the OG team. They were familiar with Plato and the material he was familiar with, namely the teachings coming out of Mesopotamia and Sumer and on into Egypt and Greece. And from what I understand, in this culture, the living lineage that inspired the original Platonic schools found its way into the haven of the Sufi sect of Islam, and there it became a light rekindled. With Avicenna in the East, there's a living light, the illuminating light of a living lineage, and the ear-whispered tradition that offers insight into the heart wisdom of the practices that we are doing and why we are doing them. Now we have this material in Iamblichus and Porphyry and Plotinus, etc., just like we have it in the Orphic hymns and the Chaldean oracles and the stories of Greek mythology, and then some, because now we also have access to the Mesopotamian and Egyptian sources, not to mention sleeping prophets like Edgar Cayce telling us stories about Atlantis. But never have I had the context of all of that pulled together so directly to the point as I have experienced in this book, All the World an Icon by Tom Cheetham. And today I want to talk with you a little bit about what I have been finding here. One, because I think it's super cool and I would like to share it with you. And two, because I very much want to learn more about this. And as always, I get by with a little help from my friends. Now, this book is about the author's teacher and mentor, Henry Corbin, as Corbin is teaching on Ibn Arabi or Avicenna. And I was turned on to this topic, Henry Corbin in particular, by the writer and teacher Gary Lachman through his various books, writings, and presentations. So, the first point that we need to understand in order to have this conversation is what is meant by the term creative imagination. For if we are to get on to how it may be understood to be the modus operandi for soul-saving action, or Theurgy, we need to be on the same terms for understanding what it is. My understanding is that the words creative imagination are being used in this context in a way that is synonymous with the ensouled cosmic anima mundi that Richard Tarnas talks about, or the super-sensible realm that Rudolf Steiner writes about, or the Sambhogakaya realm as described in the writings and teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. This is the numinous realm of angels, dharmapalas, and dakinis, elementals, stars, planets, colors, sounds, syllables. The realm which stands between us and our physical bodies in the material world, or the Nirmanakaya, and the all-encompassing source energy of the beloved, or the Dharmakaya. Essentially, as it is taught in many religions, mystical sects of religions, and different, philosophical views, there is a threefold nature of reality. There's the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. The white, the red, and the blue. The Om, the Ah, and the Hung. And the active creative imagination is the Ah, the red, and the Sambhogakaya realm. But as Corbin points out, in Western philosophy, we often see a disconnect between thought and being. Thought, the highest realm, or the Buddha mind of the Dharmakaya, and being, the lowest realm, or the coarse physical realm of the Nirmanakaya. And what Avicenna and Corbin are saying is that's not true. The Sambhogakaya realm, or the realm of the creative imagination, connects the other two. It's the ground where they meet and interact. And we know from our studies in alchemy that the motion between these realms with regards to the elementals moves in two directions. It moves downwards from source to fire, to air, to water, to earth, and then it moves upwards from physical manifestation to earth, to water, to air, to fire, and back up to source. It's the two triangles and the two directions that they face, right? So hence between the highest realm of source and the lowest rung of earth, there's communication and reciprocation going on that we may see evidenced in the realm of the creative imagination. I'm thinking of the fact that there are both whole to part and part to whole synchronicities. With apologies to Richard Tarnas, I will attempt to explain what that means. The first case is whole to part synchronicity, and that comes through dreams or moments of deja vu. It's like something is talking to you, like the synchronicities are arising and you're trying to connect the message. It's trying to tell you something. And the other kind, from part to whole, is when you've been thinking or visualizing or talking about something and it suddenly appears again via synchronicity. It's like a confirmation that you're on the right track and that what you've been attempting to communicate to something larger, that something larger than you is hearing you, and it's letting you know it's receiving the message via these synchronicities. That's my understanding, at least. There's whole to part and part to whole synchronicities. The point is that we see this two-way reciprocal motion going on between us and source, taking place in this liminal realm of the creative imagination. And through this distinction in the types of synchronicities, we can see a concrete example of how that works. But what's really interesting is that apparently what happens in this realm of the creative imagination doesn't stay in the realm of creative imagination. As Tom Cheetham writes, what we take to be ontological truth has no effect on our physical being. That's how we function in modernity. But that's not true. Thought is connected to being by way of creative imagination, and it's a reciprocal relationship. What we think actually affects who we become by way of creative imagination. It is by the means of creative imagination in this specific sense that we discover the mode of perception depends on the mode of being of the perceiver. We are changed utterly, ontologically, in our very being by the exercise of active imagination. And this allows us to see things that we cannot otherwise see. Our great task is to make ourselves capable of God. Wow, you see what I mean? This guy is really cool. Basically, like, what he's saying is that what happens in the synergy between us and God in the realm of creative imagination, and the way we contextualize and understand that relationship, and the way that contextualization changes through cycles and transits, doesn't stay there. Changes in the way we contextualize that situation actually trickle down, affecting corresponding changes both in our physical world and in our physical body. So the question then becomes, how do we do this? How do we enter into it? How do we encourage this process along of what Corbin goes so far as to call the transfiguration? For he does go so far as to call it that. And the answer that Corbin and Cheetham, in his excellent teaching on this subject, offers is that we are to encourage this process along by way of cultivating the view, by polishing the glass, breaking the glass, maybe even, so that the light may shine through. In religious studies, we call this spiritual hermeneutics, and Corbin calls it ta'wil, a term which I will let him explain. The active creative imagination is an organ of both perception and creation. Insofar as we participate in the divine realm, it is creative. To the degree that we are separate creatures, it is perceptive. The organ in question is the heart, and the action is the thought of the heart. The heart as an organ, as the organ of active imagination, at once produces symbols and apprehends them. The apprehension the reading and understanding of the symbols is not merely an intellectual exercise, but an exegesis that transforms the soul. It's a spiritual exegesis, spiritual hermeneutics. The Tawil enables men to enter a new world, to accede to a higher plane of being. So hermeneutics and ontology are inseparably joined. Your mode of understanding corresponds to your mode of being. The action of Tawil is essential symbolic understanding, the transmutation of everything into visible symbols. It involves carrying the symbol back toward the divine ground from which it derives and which it symbolizes. The alchemical operation of Tawil accomplishes what Mullah Sadar calls the intensification of being, and so transforms the human soul. This is revolutionary. It turns the world inside out. Philosophy, and indeed rational thought of any sort, only reaches its proper culmination in a rupture of a plane, a profound event of the soul, in which the image of reality so carefully and reasonably established is seen to finally be a product of the soul's own projection of its own innermost reality. Each of us carries in himself the image of his own world, his imago mundi, and projects it into a more or less coherent universe, which becomes the stage on which his destiny is played out. Imago mundi. I love that. I hadn't heard that term before, and it super makes me laugh because I can just see myself like standing in a field with like my birth chart and my solar return stack, like I'm the Imago Mundi, and the cosmic Anima Mundi with its wheel in the sky, you know, of the real-time transits, the cycles, the eclipses, all of that. That's kind of, you know, more not fixed in my chart, you know, that wheel, and these two wheels kind of efforting to come into like vroom alignment, right? It's just super cool. But basically, we understand from this that it is by way of cultivating our sense of interpretation, our heart sense, our ability to read and interpret symbols and translate that into increased awareness and understanding, that we are literally able to change the physical structure of the world around us and of our own bodies. To a relative extent, of course. Karma is always a bitch, and we will get onto that, because things that are super hard and dense and difficult to move are often Saturn things, things that relate to our karma. And it's harder to free ourselves of the context of those. Even harder maybe would be our Pluto or our subconscious or unconscious tendencies, depending on where you stand with using Pluto in the radix or in your practice. So basically what is being said here is that in order to quicken the process of becoming capable of God and slowly transfiguring our physical reality so that we are coming into or arising into a God realm as we, you know, come into being, we are, in order to do that, we are to cultivate our capacity for Tawil, our ability to interpret spiritual symbols and communications. But the question then becomes, what are we reading? The arising? Hey, we astrologers might know something about that, right? As Cheetham goes on to explain, the Tawil of texts supposes the Tawil of the soul. Reciprocally, the soul takes its departure, accomplishes the Tawil of its true being by basing itself on a text of a book or a cosmic text, which its efforts will carry to a transmutation, raised to the rank of the real but inner and psychic event. The hermeneutics that he defends properly culminate in a mystic vision, and the sacred text or the poetry or even the text of the world itself all arise with the soul to finally burst into song. So the notion of reading the world as a text is a central premise in this book. It's called All the World an Icon, and he's making the distinction between icons and idols, with icons being kind of a clear and free, like unfettered reflection of source energy, and idols being those same clear reflections, only fettered and grasped at and made rigid and solid and fixed and bounded and unchangeable, like a good idea that gets stuck. So that's the idols. So they're icons and idols. And he's saying all the world an icon. However, we also find this idea of reading the world as a text in the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, who wrote about the doctrine of correspondences. And of course, this idea of reading the world as a text naturally lends itself really well to astrology. For we have this eagle here, right? Which is meaning that, like, as Bernadette Brady teaches in the opening story to her book, Predictive Astrology, that as astrologers in our astrology practice, that we have both an eagle and a lark. And the eagle is like the scientific observations, the methods, the calculations and the angles. And, you know, we say, oh, that if it's in that house and the ruler's in that house, then we do this. Like, you know, that's the eagle. Or to know where the Anastasia point is, or to pull in which one's rising first, or all these things. These are the science. And, you know, depending on how great we've gotten at studying these things, this is our eagle. Okay. But we also have in our practice another voice, which is the lark. And the lark is like the songbird who taps more into our psychic and intuitive sense and into our heart sense, and helps us to kind of helps us to do astrology, or to make forecasts or predictions, right, by way of our intuition and by way of our more psychic sense. So the eagle is very like dry and separative, and the lark is very more like moist, right, and connective. Okay, and so it's not just me wanting to see the practice of astrology in these writings, because the fact is that we are basically dared to keep going with this line of thinking. Okay, so as Tom Cheetham continues, to lead back to the origin, this is the exact meaning of the word which designates esoteric spiritual exegesis, or to will. Thus, cyclical time leading back to origin becomes itself an exegesis, the total exegesis of mankind, the archetype of all exegesis. The cycle of time that leads back to origin. Now, this is something that we are familiar with, right? The full circle of the zodiacal wave, with its outwardly aimed red shift from Capricorn to Cancer, and its blue shift of return to source and origin from Cancer to Capricorn, and the creation of the Taurus field that this situation creates. And we actually know a lot about this and what it looks like, thanks to the work of Santos Bonacci and likely others, but in my case, thanks to Santos. But whereas this aspect of Santos's work is giving us, like, Santos's work is giving us the physics and the science of light and the sound, Henry Corbin and Ibn Arabi are giving us the sentiment, the way it feels, and our human emotional experience of it. As Cheetham goes on to explain, here is the cycle. The angelic rank is surpassed in the fall, which gives rise to the past in which one can fall, but which then again, by the energy of repentance and nostalgia personified in the figure of the eternal feminine, becomes the future leading back towards the eternal present. And here lies the central point. This structure of cyclical time provides the archetypical pattern for all understanding. And so basically what is being said here is that in the first phase, like the first phase of the cycle is the fall, and the second phase is the return by way of the energy of nostalgia and repentance. So, you know, the red shift of the wave is the fall, and the blue shift of the wave, the return. and it all syncretizes really well. And in addition, it also all syncretizes with the heart and the two mechanisms of the heart, like going out and coming back, the red blood, the blue blood, all of that. So it's really pretty cool. So he goes on to say that the Tawil, or the spiritual exegesis, the operation properly consists in bringing back, recalling and returning to its origin, not only the text of a book, but also the cosmic context in which the soul is imprisoned. The soul must free this context and free itself from it by transmuting it into symbols. This transmutation will be the event of our recitals. So, in other words, he's basically telling us to free ourselves of the context of our birth chart, to use the charts and the wheels to identify and clear our karma. And when we do, when we dislodge a speck, especially a really stuck Saturn speck from the lens of glass that we're looking to view through to try to get this picture of God to come through and to line ourselves up with it, when we dislodge a speck, we know it. When something happens, when that happens, we can speak to it. We're inspired. We're all of a sudden oh my gosh, I see it so differently. There's been this epiphany that changes us and our understanding of the way the world works and the way our relationship with God works, and also just who we are as a person. And this is what, as the fact that we can speak to it is, and it bursts into song, this is what Avicenna calls a recital. And so, and that reminds me, I love that. I love that word, recital. The ballerina in me really loves that. But in addition, it's kind of you see a lot of spiritual teachings that open kind of with a recital, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. It'll be an homage to the teacher in the beginning that includes this epiphany that they're about to write about. And it's they've had this foundational epiphany, and they've understood a teaching and finally, a koan, they broke through, and they're going to write about it. And they open with an homage to the teacher and the gods and things like that, and then they go on to recite. And so so it's through this process that we dislodge the stuck aspects of our karma, and eventually kind of free up the placements of our birth chart so that they are bringing out in a way that's, I guess, of the higher self than the lower self. Everything could have more than one way of manifesting, right? And so freeing ourselves from the context of the birth chart. So there's a lot more in there about the combat for the angel, and the appearance of the guide, about the fact that prayer is one of the highest and best ways to engage the creative imagination, which immediately makes me think of the visualization practices of guru yoga, and we're imagining ourselves one color and God another color, and we're seeing the 5 color lights of the elementals around us. We're drawing the mandala, the corners and everything, and the elements, so all of this is very much engaging this space of the creative imagination. And so if you're interested in this material, I would definitely recommend picking up a copy of this book. It's probably my favorite one that I got all winter. I'm a big fan of it, and I hope to read more. But I'm also trying not to fall in a Henry Corbin hole, like Tom Cheetham has been. He's written 5 books on the guy. I don't want to fall in the Henry Corbin hole. But at the same time, it's fascinating and interesting, and I definitely am very interested in learning more. And there is much more to learn. I have seen some things online about the moon and the way that the light from the moon collects the light from the sun, and then it filters down into the lunar mansions, and that each of the lunar mansions relates to a letter, and each of those letters to a face of God, you know? And so this is very interesting. It's interesting in a like spiritual sense of, you know, just kind of getting the gist of what is out there and the cosmic anima mundi and how it's working. But it's also my eagle is also very interested in this, you know, interested in thinking about how you could track that and how you could use that, like the more rational scientific parts of the information, you know, to how you could use it to make progress, to do this or that. And I think that I'm going to end with a quote, but the last point that I want to make is that this whole presentation reminds me a lot of what Alice Bailey consistently reminds us, to remember to go backwards on the wheel, right? So in my understanding, you know, the forwards on the wheel would be dexter motion and backwards on the wheel would be sinister motion. And so, you know, it's like remembering to go to take the information from astrology charts, like when we're doing our astro, and rather than consistently trying to go forward with it, well, I want to manifest this, I want to manifest this, I want to manifest this, is to remember to say, oh wait, I want to go backwards, and I want to make sure I'm learning what I'm learning so that I dissolve those past lessons in me that I got stuck, that created kleshas and karmas and knots. And I want to, you know, I want to work to dissolve and massage those pieces of karma out. And then, you know, and as we're moving forward, rather than manifesting, also considering, like, I don't want to plant any new seeds. Like, I want to exhaust the seeds that are there in a lot of ways, right? And so this material reminds me of that teaching, and offers some more insight with, like, how does that work, right? And I think it's something that we can all probably come up with an example in our lives where we've had this happen, where like just an intensification happens, and then even just a song, right? Like the song lyrics suddenly dawn on you, and you're like, oh my gosh, and it speaks to your life and like your broken heart, and then suddenly like you're like, oh wait, it was never about me, and like you like let that go, and you're lighter for it, right? And probably you call your best friend, and you're like, oh my gosh, and what you're saying about the synchronicity and the symbols doesn't make a whole lot of sense to the person you're talking to, you know, like it's so personal, but nonetheless what you're saying about the lessons certainly does make sense, right? The recital part of it. So yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this presentation. So here's my closing quote. So this is from Henry Corbin, Alone with the Alone, Creative Imagination and the Sufism of Ibn Arabi. And here we go. The authentic mystic wisdom is that of the soul which knows itself as a theophany, an individual form in which all are epiphanized, the divine attributes which it would be unable to know if it did not discover and apprehend them in itself. When you have entered into my paradise, you have entered into yourself, and you know yourself with another knowledge, different from that which you had when you knew your Lord by the knowledge you had of yourself. For now you know him, and it is through him that you know yourself. Okay, that's about it for this video. I appreciate you being here and for sticking with me through the presentation. Thanks for liking the video and subscribing to the channel. But in addition, I'm super interested to hear your comments because, as I mentioned, one, I came here to connect with you guys and to kind of get the stir the pot a little bit so that I can communicate and relate with you guys a bit as friends. Because I'm kind of doing other things in my life right now, but I definitely do miss this engagement, and I miss you guys. So I would love to hear your comments and hear how you're doing. But also, I'm very interested in hearing if you have ideas, leads, reading links, you know, etc. on topics like this or related to this, because I'm super interested in learning more about it. And yeah, you guys are all super smart, and I bet you anything that you probably know more than me. So I'm looking forward to seeing that feedback come through as well. But in the meantime, I wish you great happiness, and I send you my love and appreciation and gratitude that for our friendship and connection. Okay, love you guys. See you soon.